I came home from my morning walk to find a stranger standing in my garage, running his hands along the hood of my old Buick. My Buick. The one I restored after Marjorie passed. My son, Daniel, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smirking like he'd done me a favor. "Relax, Dad. He's just here to look. You don't drive it anymore." My hands trembled. That car wasn't just chrome and rubber, it was grief, memory, love. He tried to sell it behind my back. So I did the only thing that made sense. I sold the house instead. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when Daniel would race to the garage just to hand me a wrench. "Did I do good, Dad?" he'd ask, his little hands smudged with grease. I used to look at him and think, that boy's gonna have a good heart. And for a while, he did. Back when Marjorie was still alive, our home was full of warmth and noise. Not the kind of noise that makes you want to leave the room, but the kind that made the walls feel alive. She sang in the kitchen, off-key, but with soul, while Daniel zoomed around the house with a plastic airplane, shouting over her notes. I worked hard, 2 jobs sometimes, but every time I turned the doorknob and stepped into our home, it felt worth it. Everything I did was for them. We bought the house in '81. Small, worn, but it had bones. Marjorie called it our fixer-upper dream, and we meant to fix it slowly, but love made us impatient. Weekends were for painting walls and planting hydrangeas. When Daniel came along, we moved heaven and earth to make that little place feel like a castle. His room had stars on the ceiling, real glow-in-the-dark stickers we peeled and pressed one by one. The car came a few years later, a 1972 Buick Skylark, red with white interior. I bought it from a retired teacher who was moving into assisted living. "She's got good miles left," he said, patting the hood. I remember driving it home while Marjorie leaned out the window like a teenager, laughing into the wind. That was the car we took on every family road trip. That was the car I taught Daniel to drive in. That's also the car I buried my grief in. When Marjorie passed, cancer, sudden, brutal, I couldn't cry at the funeral. Couldn't even speak. But the next morning, I went into the garage, opened the Buick's hood, and just stared at the engine. Took me 2 months to take it apart, clean every bolt, and put it back together. No rush. Just something to keep my hands busy while my heart ached. Daniel was there for some of it. He'd drop by after work, bring me soup or sit in silence while I worked. "You okay, Dad?" he'd ask, and I'd nod, even though I wasn't. But I appreciated that he asked. Back then, I thought he understood. He was a good kid, bright, polite, curious. Always asked questions about how things worked. We built birdhouses together when he was 9, fixed a broken sprinkler at 12, and by 16, he was under the Buick with me, tightening bolts like a pro. I always thought those moments would anchor him. I thought I was giving him roots. When he left for college, I packed his bags and reminded him to check his oil. I cried after he drove off, not just because I'd miss him, but because I was proud. Proud that I'd raised someone who could go out into the world and still know where he came from. The calls slowed down, of course. That happens. Kids get busy. But he always came home for Christmas. Always asked if the Buick still ran. I'd say, "Purrs like a kitten," and he'd grin. Then he met Kelly. Sweet girl, at first. Polite, respectful, always brought wine to dinner even though I don't drink. But I noticed the shift. Subtle. The way she wrinkled her nose at my recliner. The way Daniel started calling our house the old place. I let it go. They were young. Young people like new things. I still had hope back then. Hope that when they had kids, Daniel would remember what it meant to raise a family in a home filled with history. I thought maybe he'd ask to learn more about the Buick, or fix the fence with me like we used to. But time has a way of wearing things down. Still, I stayed quiet. I kept the routines. Every Sunday, I waxed the Buick. Every spring, I pruned Marjorie's roses. I kept her chair by the window just as she left it, with her reading glasses still on the armrest. It wasn't morbid, it was memory. And then one day, I heard Daniel on the phone, talking to someone about liquidating assets. I should have asked then. I should have put my foot down. But a part of me didn't want to believe it. Not him. Not the boy who once cried when I missed his school play because I was working late. Not the same kid who held my hand during Marjorie's funeral. But people change. Or maybe we just stop seeing them clearly. I think about those good years often, maybe too often. I remember how Daniel used to lean against the Buick with that boyish grin, or how he'd race to be the first one to grab Marjorie's hand when we walked through the park. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was ours. Built with care, held together by love and long days. And that car, that beautiful, rust-edged Buick, it carried all of it. Every mile, every laugh, every tear. You can't just sell something like that. Not unless you've forgotten everything it ever meant. The change didn't happen all at once. It started with the little things, the way Daniel stopped calling before visits, how he'd walk into the house and head straight for the fridge without a word. I used to greet him with a hug at the door, but he began brushing past me like I was just part of the wallpaper. I chalked it up to stress. He had a new job, a growing family, a mortgage. Life gets heavy. But then there were the remarks. At first, they came from Kelly. Subtle, polite, but cutting if you knew how to listen. "Oh, this chair is very vintage." Or, "You still use this old thermostat? No smart system?" She said it with a smile, always a smile, like she was doing me a favor by pointing it out. Daniel would laugh along with her. A little too loud, like he was trying to prove something. I'd stand there, clutching the tea towel or a bag of groceries, and pretend I didn't hear. Pretend it didn't sting. They started bringing their kids over less often. When they did, the children were glued to their tablets, barely looking up unless it was time to go. I tried to show my grandson how to change a tire once, thought it'd be a good bonding moment. He just blinked at me and said, "Dad says cars fix themselves now." Daniel laughed when I told him. "Come on, Dad. It's not the 80s anymore." Then came the questions. Innocent at first, maybe even well-meaning. "Dad, do you really need this much space? You're alone most of the time. Have you thought about downsizing? Might be easier for you. You could get a nice little condo closer to the city. Sell this place, put your feet up." Every time he said it, I'd force a chuckle. "I'm fine here, son. This is home." But he kept pushing. One Sunday afternoon, he stood in the middle of the living room, the room Marjorie and I painted seafoam green in '83, and said, "You know, if you ever think about selling, you'd get a lot for this place. Property values sky high." I just stared at him. He smiled, like it was a joke. "Just saying. Might as well cash in while it's worth something." That word, cash in, hung in the air like smoke. That was the first time I saw it, the glint in his eye, the tightening of his mouth. It wasn't just casual talk anymore. It was interest. Investment. Me? I was becoming a line on a spreadsheet. Still, I let it slide. I told myself he didn't mean it that way. I told myself he was just being practical. But the air kept changing. He stopped sitting at the table after meals. Used to be, we'd talk about sports or weather or the kids. Now, he'd excuse himself, scroll through his phone, or take calls in the hallway. Kelly followed suit. And suddenly, I was left alone at the kitchen table, staring at my half-finished tea, wondering when I'd become invisible. Then came the incident with the mailbox. One morning, I found Daniel fiddling with it, replacing the old brass one Marjorie picked out with a sleek black box that matched his aesthetic. "Thought I'd help you modernize a bit," he said. I didn't ask him to. He didn't even mention it beforehand. "You took down the old one?" I asked quietly. "It was falling apart, Dad." "It wasn't. It had a little rust. That was all." The next week, I found our wedding photo, the one that sat in the hallway for 40 years, moved to a drawer in the guest room. "Too much clutter," Kelly explained. "We're just helping you simplify." We. That word hit me harder than I admitted at the time. Since when was we making decisions about my home? The garage became the next target. I caught Daniel in there one afternoon, taking photos of the Buick. He said it was for insurance records. But I saw the angle of the shots, wide, clean, like a listing. He didn't ask me about it. Didn't even mention it until I asked him what he was doing. He shrugged. "You don't really drive it anymore. Figured it's time we start thinking ahead." "We?" Another pause. He shifted, suddenly aware of himself. "I mean, just trying to help, Dad. It's taking up space." Taking up space. That car had taken my wife and me down the California coast, windows open, laughter echoing into the cliffs. That car held Daniel's car seat, a sippy cup wedged between the seats. That car heard me weep the first night I slept alone after Marjorie died. And now, to him, it was taking up space. I remember sitting in the driver's seat that night, just holding the steering wheel. The leather was cracked, the scent of old pine air freshener still faint. I closed my eyes and remembered Marjorie's hand on my thigh, the way she hummed along with the radio. I remembered Daniel's voice, young and excited, asking if he could honk the horn. And then I remembered the way he looked at me earlier, not with care, but calculation. That was the first time I felt afraid. Not afraid of losing the house or the car. Afraid of losing the one person I thought I'd never have to question. My son. The boy who once whispered, "I'll take care of you when you're old, Daddy," now looked at me like a tenant overstaying his welcome. The cracks were spreading. I just didn't know yet how deep they'd run. It was a Sunday. A warm, golden afternoon where the light filtered through the kitchen window like something out of a memory. I was setting the table for dinner, pot roast, just like Marjorie used to make it. The smell filled the house, soft and comforting. Daniel and his family arrived late, as usual. Kelly walked in first, carrying a bottle of wine I didn't ask for. Daniel trailed behind, distracted by his phone, barely offering more than a mumbled, "Hey, Dad." The kids didn't even say hello. Just collapsed onto the couch and turned on some show I couldn't stand. I tried not to let it get to me. I reminded myself that this was what family was now, distant, distracted, digitally connected and emotionally frayed. Still, I held on. I kept traditions alive the only way I knew how. At dinner, Daniel carved the roast, his mother used to do that, while I poured the iced tea. We ate in silence for a while, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace but from avoidance. Then Daniel chuckled. "You know what Kelly said today?" he asked, grinning at his wife. She smirked, leaned forward. "I said, if we finally get Dad to let go of that old Buick, we'd have room to put in a proper gym." Laughter. From them, not from me. Daniel chimed in. We could finally turn the garage into something useful. Maybe even start renovating the house a bit. You know, bring it into this century. I stared at him. Start renovating? He nodded like it was already decided. Yeah. If you let us manage the place, we could fix it up. Maybe even flip it eventually. There's good money in that kind of thing. My fork slipped from my hand. It hit the plate with a loud clink, startling even the kids. I'm not flipping anything, I said. My voice was low, firm. Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, all right. Just an idea. But Kelly couldn't help herself. I mean, the car's a start, right? It's just sitting there, gathering dust. We've already got someone interested. I looked at her, confused. What do you mean, already? Daniel gave her a look, subtle, sharp, the kind of look couples give when one of them says too much. Kelly looked away. I felt my stomach twist. Daniel, I said, what did you do? He tried to laugh it off. Relax, Dad. I just put out a feeler. Listed the car on a few sites. No harm in seeing what people are offering. You listed it? I said, voice rising. Without asking me? Come on, you haven't driven it in years. That's not the point. My voice cracked, and the kids looked up, startled. The room went still. I pushed my chair back and stood. My hands were trembling, but not from age. From rage. That car is mine. I rebuilt that engine with these hands. After your mother died, that garage was the only place I could breathe. And you went behind my back. Daniel sighed, annoyed more than apologetic. Dad, it's just a car. You're acting like I sold your soul. I wanted to say, you might as well have. But I didn't. I just turned and walked out of the dining room. I went straight to the garage, flipped on the light, and stared at the Buick. The hood was down, the paint still shining beneath years of polish. I opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, and closed my eyes. The silence in there was different. Heavy. Like the walls had heard everything. I stayed there for a long time. Long enough for the roast to go cold. Long enough for them to leave without saying goodbye. The next morning, I walked outside and found a business card tucked under the windshield wiper. Mark Simmons, collector. Classic cars bought and sold. My blood ran cold. I turned the card over. On the back, scrawled in Daniel's handwriting, interested in Buick. We'll call Monday. That was the moment. Not the dinner. Not the listing. Not the laughter. That little card. That quiet, smug assumption that he had the right to sell the last piece of my heart, the last place Marjorie's touch still lived. That was betrayal. Not loud, not violent, but deep. Sharp. Later that week, I called my neighbor Frank. Asked if he'd seen anyone around my garage. He nodded. Yeah. Guy came by Saturday. Took a look around. Said he had an appointment with Daniel. Frank hesitated. Then added, said he thought you were, ready to let go of the past. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I hadn't let go of the past. The past had been stripped from me, one piece at a time, by a son who no longer saw me as a man, just an old inconvenience sitting on untapped value. When I went back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, alone. I looked at the seat Marjorie used to take. I remembered her voice, her warmth, the way she always smoothed the tablecloth even when no one was watching. I imagined what she'd say now. Probably nothing. Just that look she gave when something hurt more than words could fix. And in that silence, I made a decision. If Daniel wanted to sell pieces of my life like junkyard parts, then maybe it was time I showed him what real loss looked like. The funny thing about betrayal is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing all the cracks, the ones you ignored, the ones you patched up, hoping they'd hold. A few days after the business card incident, I went looking for a pen in the desk drawer Daniel used when he stayed over. He hadn't used it in months, or so I thought. Inside, I found a manila folder labeled Transition Plan. My name was scribbled in the corner in blue ink. I knew I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. The first page was a spreadsheet, housing options, prices, distances from Daniel's home. One row was highlighted, Oak Ridge Senior Living, 4.7 stars, 12 minutes from Daniel and Kelly. Next to it, a handwritten note, good reviews. Private rooms available. Sell house, cover costs. I flipped to the next page. It was a rough budget. House value estimated at $460,000. Monthly living costs projected. Somewhere near the bottom, in Kelly's neat handwriting, it read, "He won't need much. Keep it simple." I closed the folder. Sat there staring at the wall like I'd been punched in the chest. They weren't just thinking about the car. They were planning to move me out. Plan my exit like I was a piece of equipment that had run its course. Something to be stored away. I wanted to scream. But there was no one to scream at. Just silence. I sat in that silence for a long time, gripping the arms of my chair until my knuckles turned white. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Marjorie's voice in my head, not angry, just weary. "We gave him everything, Harold. We gave him everything." I remembered a moment from years ago, when Daniel was just a teenager. We were standing in the driveway. He'd dented the side of the Buick trying to park it. He looked terrified, like he thought I was going to lose my mind. But I just sighed and said, "It's okay, son. We'll fix it. Just don't lie to me." He didn't. Not then. But now? Now he was lying with smiles, with shrugs, with paperwork filed behind my back. A few days later, I decided to test something. I told Daniel I was thinking about updating my will, casually, over coffee. He didn't react right away. Just sipped his drink and nodded. But his foot started tapping. "Yeah," he said. "That's probably a good idea. I mean, things change. It's smart to be prepared." I looked at him, long and quiet. He couldn't meet my eyes. That was confirmation enough. After he left, I started observing. Really observing. Phone calls he took in the hallway. The way Kelly steered conversations back to money. The times he asked if I'd thought more about the condo idea. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. I even caught him taking pictures of the backyard from the upstairs window. He was casing the house. Planning like it was already his. That week, I went to the garage and opened the Buick's glove compartment. Inside was an old Polaroid of Marjorie sitting on the hood, her hair tied back, laughing at something I'd said. That photo had been there since 1990. I held it in my hand and made myself a promise. "You won't let them erase this. Not while you're still breathing." The next morning, I visited Marjorie's grave. I hadn't been in weeks. Shame kept me away, shame that I'd let it get this far. I stood by her headstone, tracing the carved letters with my fingers. The stone was cold, but familiar. "I'm sorry, love," I whispered. I thought he was better than this. I stayed there for an hour. Maybe more. I told her everything, the listing, the plan, the folder. I told her about the car, the look in Daniel's eyes, the quiet way betrayal slips into a room when no one's watching. When I left, I felt lighter. Not better, but clearer. I knew what I had to do. That same afternoon, I started making phone calls. Not to family. To a lawyer. To Elaine. She'd been Marjorie's best friend for decades, and now she handled wills, estates, the messy stuff people don't like to think about until it's too late. She answered on the first ring. "Harold," she said. "You okay?" "No," I said. "But I'm ready." I told her about Daniel. About the house. About the Buick. I didn't sugarcoat it. She listened without interrupting. That's what I loved about Elaine, she never filled silences with noise. Just let you sit in them until you found your own words. "I want to make some changes," I told her. Big ones. Do you want to come in tomorrow? She asked gently. No. Tonight. There was a pause. All right, she said. Come by at 6. I hung up and stood in the middle of my kitchen. The light outside was starting to dim. I could see the hydrangeas Marjorie planted, still blooming, still defiant. I turned and looked down the hallway, the one where our wedding photo used to hang before Kelly put it away. I'd let them take too much already. But not anymore. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I showed up at Daniel's place the next evening, unannounced. Kelly opened the door with a surprised blink, holding a wine glass in one hand and her phone in the other. Oh. Harold. Is everything okay? I need to talk to my son. She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. Of course. Daniel was in the living room, lounging in a recliner. I remembered helping him move in. He looked up from the TV and blinked, surprised. Dad? We need to talk, I said. He muted the television. I sat on the edge of the sofa, rested my forearms on my knees. My voice was calm, so calm, it surprised even me. I found your transition plan, I said. He stiffened. I found the notes. The budget. The folder. I know about Oak Ridge. Daniel tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dad, I was going to talk to you about it. Don't lie, I said, quietly. He paused, then sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It's just, you're getting older. And this house, it's a lot. Kelly and I were trying to help. You've been stuck in the past ever since Mom died. It's not healthy. You think I'm incapable. No, I think, he stopped himself. Look, we've been talking about what's next. That's not betrayal, Dad. It's just planning ahead. You listed my car without asking me. Because it's sitting there doing nothing. You don't drive anymore, you barely leave the house. We're trying to create space, literal and emotional. That's not your decision. He shook his head, frustrated. You're impossible sometimes. Do you even want our help? I let the silence linger. No, I said. Not if that's what help looks like. Kelly walked in, clearly having been listening. Harold, with all due respect, we're not the villains here. You've been isolating yourself. You live in a shrine to the past. This isn't about decor, Kelly, I snapped. This is about decency. About respect. That house, that car, they're not just things. They're pieces of a life I built with someone I loved more than anything in this world. And instead of honoring that, you tried to erase it. Daniel looked away. You could have talked to me. Asked me what I wanted. But you didn't. You assumed. You planned. You moved forward without me. He stood up, suddenly defensive. Because you never move forward, Dad. You've been stuck for years. We just want to help you start living again. I stood up too, slowly. I am living. I just don't want to live under your terms. There it was. The line drawn in quiet fury. He looked at me, searching for a crack. Some soft spot he could push into like he used to when he was a boy who forgot his homework. But I wasn't bending this time. I saw the note, I added. The one that said, he won't need much. Keep it simple. Kelly had the decency to look ashamed. I'm not a budget line, Daniel, I said. I'm your father. And with that, I left. As I walked down the driveway, I passed their recycling bin. On top of the heap was a crumpled printout of my property's Zillow estimate. Red pen circled the number. That was all I needed to see. Back home, I sat on the front porch and watched the sky go orange behind the trees. For the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I felt steady. Grounded. Later that week, Frank from next door came over with a six-pack and a quiet understanding. "Heard about the car," he said, cracking one open. "That true?" I nodded. He didn't say much. Just sat with me in silence, the kind of silence only old men can share. A silence that means, "I get it. I've been there." After a while, he said, "You thinking about making changes?" "I already did," I said. I told him I'd visited Elaine, that the will had been rewritten. Daniel was no longer a beneficiary. If he contested it, everything would go to a veterans charity Marjorie used to donate to. Frank whistled. "Bold move." "It was necessary." "You think he'll find out?" "I hope he does." I spent the next few days sorting through boxes in the attic. Not for anything in particular, just to remember. Old photos, Marjorie's recipe cards, Daniel's finger paintings. I held each one like it might dissolve in my hands. And I began to realize something. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming something that had been slipping from me for years, my voice. My dignity. The quiet power of choosing for myself. I wasn't going to scream or fight or slam doors. That's not who I am. But I wasn't going to be erased either. Not by anyone. Not even by my own blood. Elaine's office hadn't changed much since the last time I was there, back when Marjorie and I had first drawn up our wills. The same brass lamp. The same scuffed oak desk. Even the little candy dish on the corner, butterscotch, just like Marjorie liked. Elaine stood as I walked in and gave me a gentle smile. "You sure about this, Harold?" "No," I said. "But I'm ready." She nodded, the kind of nod that said she understood more than I'd ever need to explain. She gestured toward the leather chair across from her desk, and I sat down slowly, my knees groaning under the weight of age and decision. I pulled out the new draft I'd been working on with her over the phone. She'd guided me through it step by step. What to leave, who to name, how to make sure it stuck. Daniel was out. Not a penny, not a brick, not a tire. I left the Buick to Alex, a young mechanic down at Johnson's Auto who once fixed my alternator without charging me a dime. "You take care of her," I'd told him. "She's got history." His eyes had lit up like I'd handed him the keys to a treasure chest. He respected what it meant, more than my own son did. The house, well, that was the hard part. Marjorie and I built that life together, and I couldn't just let it go to someone who treated it like a real estate flip. So I left it to a local nonprofit that ran transitional housing for veterans and young people aging out of foster care. Elaine helped set it up. They'd renovate it gently, preserve its charm, and use it as a space for people who needed a home, not just a roof. It felt right. "What if Daniel contests?" I asked. Elaine didn't blink. "We include a clause, anyone who contests forfeits their share. It's airtight." I nodded. "Harold," she said gently, leaning forward, "are you sure you want to go this far?" I looked at her, this woman who'd held Marjorie's hand during chemo, who brought over casseroles after the funeral, who knew the sound of my silence. "I gave that boy everything," I said. "And now he wants to sell it back to me." Elaine didn't press. She just slid the papers toward me and handed me a pen. My hand trembled slightly as I signed. Not from uncertainty, just the weight of what it meant. A father's final boundary. The moment I stopped hoping Daniel would remember who he used to be, and started protecting who I still was. When I finished, Elaine placed a hand over mine. "You did what you had to. Feels like losing a second child." "No," she said softly. "Feels like saving yourself." I left her office into the quiet dusk, holding the sealed envelope under my arm like it was more fragile than it looked. The world felt slower as I walked to the car. Not colder. Just clearer. At home, I sat in the garage with the Buick. Ran my hand along the hood. I whispered to Marjorie, just a few words. "It's done, love. I did it." For the first time in a long while, I felt, not peace, exactly, but control. A kind of quiet power that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone else to do right by you and do right by yourself instead. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no waking up in the middle of the night thinking I heard her voice. Just rest. Heavy and whole. The next morning, I made a fresh pot of coffee and took it to the porch. The sun came up slow, as if easing me into this new version of my life. A few hours later, I got a text from Daniel. "Hey, can we talk sometime this week? Got some things to go over." I stared at it for a long time. Then I put the phone down. Not yet. Not until I was ready. Because I knew now, if we talked, it wouldn't be to patch things up. It would be to tell him what I'd done. To show him the papers. To let him see the consequences of every small, careless moment that led us here. This wasn't revenge. Not really. It was preservation. Of memory. Of meaning. Of dignity. Of myself. It happened 3 days later. I'd just come in from watering Marjorie's hydrangeas when I heard voices in the backyard. Not the birds or the wind, but voices. Confident, unfamiliar. I walked through the kitchen and out the back door, heart already pounding, and there they were, Daniel, Kelly, and a sharply dressed man with a clipboard, all standing on my lawn. The man was pointing at the fence line. "You've got decent width here. Could definitely make a second access point. With permits, this could easily be a 2-unit property." I cleared my throat. All three turned. "Dad," Daniel said quickly, like he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Harold," Kelly added, straightening up like she was about to pitch me a timeshare. I looked at the man. "Who are you?" "Brian Delaney. I'm a realtor. Daniel invited me to walk the property. Just a preliminary assessment." "Assessment?" I repeated. Daniel stepped forward. "Look, I was going to tell you, but we've been exploring options. You've said yourself the house is too big for you. We thought." "You thought what?" "That maybe it's time to downsize. We could get a great offer for this place. You'd have money left over. You'd be more comfortable. And we'd handle everything, no stress." I just stared at him. He had no idea the will was already changed. No idea he was negotiating for something that wasn't his anymore. "And what about the car?" I asked, nodding toward the garage. Brian perked up. "You've got a classic Buick, right? We could sell it separately. Might get a collector interested." I looked at Daniel. "Did you give him a tour of the garage?" Daniel's face flushed. "It's just a car, Dad." That was it. The final straw. Not the paperwork. Not the whispers. Not even the Oak Ridge plan. It was that line, spoken again like a refrain from someone who hadn't listened the first 10 times. Just a car. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't throw a fit. I simply turned to the realtor. "Brian, was it?" He nodded, pen poised. "This house is not for sale. It never will be. Kindly get off my property." Brian looked confused, glancing at Daniel, but I didn't break eye contact. "Now." He gave a tight nod and backed away, mumbling something about misunderstanding. As he walked off, Daniel reached out to stop him. Wait, we can reschedule." "No, you can't," I said sharply. Daniel turned back to me, jaw tight. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said. "I've just stopped being silent." He crossed his arms. "You're throwing away a good opportunity over, what? Pride?" "No. Over principle. Kelly stepped forward. Harold, come on. Be logical. You're living in the past. I live in this house. You want to turn it into a project. But this isn't a property. It's my home. It was your mother's home. Daniel rolled his eyes. You're clinging to ghosts, Dad. I stepped forward then, slow but sure. No, son. I'm holding on to the only part of my life you haven't stolen yet. His mouth opened, then shut. I could see it hit him, just for a second, the weight of what he'd done. Or maybe just the realization that I wasn't playing along anymore. Without another word, I walked into the house, locked the door behind me, and went straight to my desk. I pulled out the will from Elaine's envelope and laid it flat on the table. My hands didn't shake this time. I placed it next to the business card Daniel had once tucked under my windshield. The contrast couldn't have been clearer, greed versus dignity. Then I walked to the garage. The Buick sat in its usual spot, quietly gleaming under the overhead light. I opened the door, sat inside, and ran my fingers over the steering wheel. I whispered again, like I often did, "We're almost there, love." That night, I packed away the last of the old documents, titles, appraisals, even the original deed with Marjorie's signature. I made copies and placed them in a folder marked Final Transfer. It was more than paperwork. It was closure. A few days later, I contacted the nonprofit. We set a date to begin the transition. They'd send someone to evaluate the home, and we'd draft a plan together. The place would become transitional housing for women veterans, a quiet sanctuary with room for healing. I couldn't help but smile. Marjorie would have loved that. She'd always said the house had kindness in the walls. Now, it would have purpose too. Daniel invited me to Lily's birthday party like nothing had happened. Maybe he thought I'd cooled off. Maybe he thought I'd forgotten. Or maybe, and this was more likely, he assumed I wouldn't dare make a scene. That I'd just sit quietly in the corner, like always, nodding along, letting things slide. He still didn't understand me. Not really. The party was held at a big rental hall, one of those modern places with white walls and string lights and a cotton candy machine spinning pink sugar for kids who didn't care. Kelly had outdone herself. There was a giant sign that read "Lily's Lucky 7, in glitter letters, and Daniel worked the room like a man auditioning for Father of the Year. I showed up right at 3 o'clock, wearing the same jacket Marjorie once complimented when we visited that vineyard in Napa. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, I'd never washed it. Daniel's smile faltered when he saw me walk in. He came over, drink in hand. "You made it." "Of course," I said, flatly. "You good?" "Better than you think." Before he could respond, I turned and walked past him, scanning the crowd. I spotted Kelly chatting with a group of her friends near the cake table. Their laughter stopped when they saw me approaching. "Harold," Kelly said, voice a little too loud, a little too fake. "Glad you could make it." I nodded. "Big day," I said, motioning toward Lily. 7 already. Time flies. She smiled tightly, clearly waiting for me to walk away. But I didn't. Instead, I raised my voice, just enough to be heard over the chatter and music. "I have a few words, if nobody minds." The room stilled. Parents stopped mid-conversation. The clown making balloon animals froze with half a giraffe in hand. Daniel's head turned sharply. I pulled the manila envelope from inside my jacket. "I wasn't planning on doing this here," I said. "But seeing how some people prefer to make decisions behind closed doors, I thought it only fair to be equally transparent." Daniel was moving now, fast, trying to reach me before I said more. But I stepped aside. "This," I held up the envelope, "is my updated will." Gasps rippled through the room. "You'll all be relieved to know that I'm not dying. But I am done being quiet. My house, my car, and every cent of my estate will no longer be passed down to my son. Daniel's face went pale. Dad, don't. Not a word, I said sharply, my voice cutting through the murmurs. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet, the summary page Elaine had helped me prepare. Instead, the house will be donated to Homefront Foundation, a nonprofit helping female veterans transition to stable housing. The Buick is being gifted to a young mechanic who actually respects what it represents. A woman in the back gasped. One of Kelly's friends whispered something behind her hand. Kelly's face went beet red. You can't be serious. Oh, I am. Daniel stepped forward. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said. I'm reclaiming myself. The room was frozen. I know what you all thought. That I was just some sad old man living in the past. That my silence was agreement. That I didn't notice when you measured the walls, priced the property, planned my relocation without my consent. But I did notice. And I acted. I turned to the crowd. To those of you who know me, really know me, you'll understand this isn't about revenge. It's about respect. And the people who forget that, well, they don't deserve the things I've spent a lifetime building. Daniel stood there, stunned. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Just, exposed. Uncovered in front of people who'd always seen him as the golden child. Dad, we can talk about this later. No, I said. We won't. I tucked the paper back into the envelope and held it out to him. You wanted control. Now you have clarity. He didn't take it. So I placed it on the gift table next to Lily's stack of presents, smiled at my granddaughter, who looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes, and then turned and walked out the door. I didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. Just stunned silence and a few murmurs I didn't bother to interpret. Outside, the air felt cooler. Lighter. I took a deep breath and walked to the Buick. The real celebration, I thought, was just beginning. Brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The next morning, the house was still. Quieter than usual, but not empty. There was something in the air I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I sat by the kitchen window, sipping coffee from the mug Marjorie gave me on our 30th anniversary. World's grumpiest husband, it said in bold blue letters. She used to tease me about it whenever I complained about the weather. Now I just smiled at the memory. No calls from Daniel. No messages. No angry emails demanding explanations. Just silence. I should have felt lonely. But I didn't. Because the silence wasn't cold or punishing. It was clean. Cleared out, like dust swept from a long cluttered room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was bracing for the next dismissive comment, the next passive suggestion that I'd move on, or let go. I had let go, just not in the way they expected. I spent that morning walking through the house slowly, room by room. Marjorie's chair in the corner still faced the window. I dusted it gently and set her knitting basket beside it, like it belonged there again. In the hallway, I pulled our wedding photo out from the drawer Kelly had stuffed it in months ago. I rehung it in its rightful place, center wall, first thing you see when you walk in. In the garage, I uncovered the Buick, lifted the hood, and checked the oil. The engine still smelled faintly of grease and memory. I wasn't preparing to drive it. Just honoring the ritual. Later that afternoon, Frank wandered over from next door, carrying 2 bottles of root beer and a newspaper under his arm. Word travels fast, he said, sitting on the porch steps beside me. I figured. You really laid it out at that birthday party, huh? I didn't plan to. But I'm glad I did. Frank cracked open one of the bottles and handed it to me. Well, you sure gave this town something to talk about. I smiled. Let them talk. We sat there for a while, watching the breeze move through Marjorie's hydrangeas. Frank finally broke the silence. "You think he'll come around?" "Maybe," I said. "But I'm not waiting for it." He nodded. "Sometimes doing what's right for yourself is the loneliest thing you'll ever do." "I don't feel lonely," I said. "Not today." He grinned and raised his bottle. "To not being invisible anymore." I clinked mine against his. "To not being erased." That evening, I walked through the park near the edge of town, the one Marjorie and I used to stroll through every Sunday. The same winding trail, the same wooden bench by the pond. I sat there a long time, letting the evening settle in. A few joggers passed by. A young couple walked their dog. No one gave me a second look, and I was okay with that. A little girl ran by, giggling, her father close behind. The way he looked at her, proud, attentive, reminded me of the early days with Daniel. The boy he used to be. The boy who once cried into my chest when he scraped his knee. I missed him. That version of him. But missing someone doesn't mean you have to keep letting them hurt you. The next day, I got a letter in the mail. From Lily. Crayon handwriting, a little messy, but hers. Inside was a simple drawing, me, her, and the red Buick. Above it, she'd written, "I love you, Grandpa." I held it in my hands for a long time. That night, I placed it on the mantel beside the wedding photo. Maybe the bridge wasn't entirely burned. Maybe, someday, she'd cross it back toward me. But for now, I focused on the present. The house was still mine, not just legally, but emotionally. The weight of being dismissed, disregarded, planned around, it was gone. I was old, yes. But I was not finished. And I was no longer afraid of silence. Because this kind, the kind that comes after you finally speak your truth, is the most beautiful silence there is. It started with a phone call. A week after the party, I received a message from Nora Alston, the director of the Homefront Foundation, the nonprofit that would take over the house after I was gone. I'd expected the usual pleasantries and paperwork reminders. But what she said caught me off guard. "Mr. Bell," she said, her voice bright and purposeful, "we were reviewing the property file you submitted. We're impressed, it's in excellent condition. But I had a thought, would you ever consider working with us before the official handover?" I hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, "we're short on space right now. A few women are on our wait list. The house could be used, even now, as a temporary residence. Only if you're comfortable, of course. We'd help with logistics. No pressure." I stared out the window at Marjorie's hydrangeas. Someone could live here. Now. Not years from now. Not when I'm gone. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, I sat with the idea, turning it over like a stone in my hand. The walls of this house had known laughter, music, grief, and too much quiet. Maybe it was time they heard something new. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called Nora back and told her yes. Not just yes, I told her I wanted to help. We met at the house 2 days later. Nora was younger than I'd imagined, maybe mid-40s, dressed neatly with a clipboard in one hand and a warmth that didn't feel rehearsed. "I can see why you've loved this place," she said, running her fingers gently along the dining room chair rail. "It feels lived in, but loved." "That's one way to describe it," I said, smiling faintly. We walked the house room by room. She took notes, asked questions. We talked about adding locks to certain doors, rearranging furniture, clearing out space in the garage for storage. Then she paused at the hallway. "This photo," she said, pointing to the wedding picture, "it's beautiful." I nodded. "That's Marjorie. She seems like she had a good heart." She did. Better than I deserved, most days. We stood there a moment, quiet. Then she turned to me. We could start with one resident. No disruption to your space. A trial run. Let's do it. Over the next week, I got to work, really got to work. I cleaned out the spare room, boxed up Daniel's forgotten childhood trophies, and set them aside. I dusted, vacuumed, even fixed the creaky floorboard in the hallway that had been bothering me for 10 years. It felt good. Productive. Alive. On the day she arrived, I was nervous. Her name was Tony, a former army mechanic, 41, newly sober, recently divorced, and, as Nora described her, stronger than she knows. She stepped into the house quietly, duffel bag slung over her shoulder, eyes scanning everything. "You sure about this?" she asked me directly. I nodded. "You're welcome here. It's not much, but it's home." She looked at me, uncertain. Then, finally, she stepped inside. Over the next few days, we settled into a strange but peaceful rhythm. She kept to herself mostly, but I'd hear her in the kitchen at odd hours, cooking eggs, sometimes singing softly under her breath. One morning, I found her in the garage, staring at the Buick. "Yours?" she asked. "Was mine and my wife's," I said. She nodded slowly. "I used to rebuild Jeeps overseas. Never worked on a classic like this." "You want to?" I asked. She looked surprised. "Seriously?" I tossed her the keys. "Let's see if she still purrs." That afternoon, we popped the hood and talked shop. She knew her way around an engine, no question about that. Grease on her fingers, sun on her back, a quiet focus in her eyes. It was the most life I'd seen in this garage since Marjorie died. As the days passed, Tony began opening up. She told me about her daughter, who lived with her ex. About the nights she'd sleep in her car, too proud to ask for help. About the way people look at you when they've already decided what kind of person you are. "I just needed one person not to give up on me," she said one night, sipping tea at the kitchen table. "And here I am. In your house." "You're not a guest," I said. "You're part of the story now." She smiled at that. And I meant it. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It didn't feel frozen in time. It felt used. In the best way. Doors opening and closing. Laughter from the kitchen. Tools clinking in the garage. It was becoming a home again. Not just for me. But for someone who needed one. The day the second resident arrived, I knew things were changing for good. Her name was Sandra. Mid-30s. Soft-spoken, always wore a denim jacket no matter the weather. She'd served in the Navy, then lost nearly everything in a bitter custody battle and a string of job losses. Tony helped her carry her bags in, showed her around the house, even made space in the bathroom cabinet without being asked. And just like that, the silence of the house broke open a little more. At first, I thought I might feel like a stranger in my own home, but the opposite happened. Every sound reminded me that this place, which once felt like a mausoleum of memories, was breathing again. The smell of coffee in the morning wasn't just mine. The radio played different stations depending on who woke up first. Laughter echoed from the kitchen sometimes, quiet and cautious at first, but real. The women respected my space. They weren't invasive or overbearing. They saw me not as some charity case or fragile old man but as a human being. And I saw them the same. They started calling me Mr. Bell at first. Then just Harold. One afternoon, Tony knocked on my door holding a plate of homemade banana bread. "We voted," she said. "You're officially the house grandpa." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the plate. I didn't even know there was a vote. "Unanimous," she said with a wink. A few days later, I was in the garage, oiling the hinges on the Buick's hood, when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Emma. Daniel's daughter. My granddaughter. She hadn't come with her parents. Just her. She stood there with a canvas tote bag, shifting from foot to foot. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "Hi, sweetheart." She looked older than the last time I saw her, more thoughtful. Less glued to a screen. Her eyes flicked toward the car. "You still have it?" "Of course I do." She smiled faintly. "Dad said you were mad at him." "Did he say why?" She shrugged. "Just said you didn't like the way they were trying to help." I nodded slowly, then gestured toward the car. "Want to sit?" She climbed into the passenger seat like it was sacred. We sat there in silence for a moment. Then she said, "Mom's been yelling a lot." "Dad's?" "I don't know." Quiet. "Not like before." "I'm sorry," I said. "That's not your fault." She nodded. "I just wanted to see you. I miss you." Something in my chest ached at that. "I miss you too." She looked around the garage, noticed the boxes stacked neatly in the corner, tools lined up, the scent of oil and old leather. "It feels like a memory in here." "It is. But it's also still going." She reached into her bag and pulled out something, a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me. It was a drawing. Pencil sketch. Me and her, standing beside the Buick. Above it, she'd written, "Real family lasts forever." My throat tightened. "That's beautiful," I said, voice breaking. "Do you think I could come by sometimes?" she asked. "Even if Dad doesn't?" I didn't hesitate. "This house will always be open to you." That afternoon, she stayed. Helped Tony chop vegetables for dinner, sat on the porch with Sandra, and laughed at a joke I didn't even hear. She fit in. No awkwardness. No entitlement. Just curiosity and kindness. Later, as the sun dipped low, Emma sat beside me on the porch swing. "These ladies," she said. "They're cool." "They are. They said you're opening the house to more people." "Thinking about it. Maybe a few more. Not sure yet." "I think it's amazing." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw something that gave me hope, not just for her, but for what family could mean. She didn't need to share my blood to be welcome. But she did. And that made it all the more meaningful. Daniel never showed up. Neither did Kelly. But I didn't miss them. Because every day, the house filled a little more with people who saw its worth, not its market value, but its heart. Sandra fixed the broken stair rail. Tony painted the front door deep green, Marjorie's favorite color. Emma came back the next weekend with a tray of brownies and a stack of her schoolbooks. We weren't related in the traditional way. But we were building something better. Something chosen. Something honest. And in the middle of it all was me, not a forgotten old man, but a grandfather, a teacher, a witness to something sacred. Real family isn't just who you raise. It's who shows up. It was a gray Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Nora had texted that morning to say her visit was postponed, and Tony and Sandra were both at appointments. Emma had gone back to school for the week. The house was quiet. Peaceful. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize him. Daniel stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, hair slightly longer, a weight in his eyes that hadn't been there before. No Kelly. No kids. Just him. "Hi, Dad." I nodded. "Daniel." He looked past me, toward the hall. "Can I come in?" I paused for a moment, then stepped aside. He walked slowly, like a man stepping into a memory he wasn't sure he deserved. His eyes landed on the wedding photo in the hallway. He stared at it longer than I expected. "You put it back." "I never should have taken it down." He nodded. We sat in the living room. I didn't offer him anything. He didn't ask. I heard about the garage project, he said finally. Emma talks about it. A lot. I said nothing. She loves coming here, he added. Says you listen better than anyone else. She listens, too. He smiled faintly. Yeah, she gets that from Mom. Silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile. He shifted in his seat. I was angry, he said. At first. After the party. I thought, how could you do that? Just cut me out like that. You were never cut out, Daniel, I said calmly. You walked away. He lowered his head. I know, he whispered. I know I did. He rubbed his hands together, staring down at the floor. I don't know when it happened. When I stopped seeing you as a person, not just my dad. You were always just there. I thought I was helping, pushing you towards something better. But really, I just wanted control. And I didn't want to admit that I didn't know what was best for you. I watched him quietly. His shoulders were slumped, not like a man defeated, but like someone realizing they'd been holding the wrong weight for too long. I saw what you built here, he said. What you're doing with the house. With the women. With Emma. It's beautiful. It's honest, I said. He nodded again. There was a pause. I came to say I'm sorry, he said, voice raw. Not to get back in the will. Not to undo what's done. Just. I needed to say it. I looked at him for a long time. There was no script for moments like this. No guarantee that this apology would fix anything. It didn't erase what he'd done. But something in his eyes, in the smallness of his posture, told me this wasn't for show. And I didn't need a grand gesture. I just needed him to mean it. I appreciate that, I said. He looked up, eyes meeting mine. I'm not ready to forgive, I continued. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way you'd like. But I'm not angry anymore. He swallowed hard. That's fair. We sat in silence a while longer. Then he stood. I won't take more of your time. At the door, he paused. I don't know what kind of father I've been lately. But I want to be a better son. Even if I'm too late. I opened the door. You're not too late to be a better man. He nodded, eyes glassy. And then, just before he stepped outside, he turned. Take care of the Buick. I smiled faintly. Always. After he left, I returned to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed. It was closure, not reunion. A moment of truth between two people who'd hurt each other more with silence than words. I didn't know if Daniel would come back. But I knew this. He'd finally seen me. Not as an obstacle. Not as a house to inherit or a car to sell. But as a man. A father. And maybe, one day, a friend again. Speech balloon. Was the sun too late? What would you have done? Share your thoughts below. The ribbon cutting happened on a warm Saturday morning in early spring. The porch had been swept clean. The front door, freshly painted green, stood wide open. Guests milled about the yard, neighbors, board members from the nonprofit, a few local reporters, and even some of the residents who had once stayed in the house during those first trial months. There was a sign out front now. Marjorie's house, a place to begin again. Tony came up with the name. Sandra designed the little wooden plaque. Emma helped paint it. I didn't argue. It felt right. As people gathered around, I stood on the porch with Nora and gave a short speech, nothing dramatic. Just a few words from the heart. This house has always been more than bricks and wood, I said. It's been a place of beginnings. First jobs. First kisses. First tears. And now, it'll keep being that for others. My wife, Marjorie, filled this place with warmth. I've done my best to keep that fire going. Today, it burns brighter than ever. A few people clapped. A few cried. When the ribbon was cut, I felt something shift, not just in the air, but inside me. A weight lifted. A circle closed. After the crowd dispersed, I sat on the porch swing with Emma. She wore a floral dress Marjorie would have loved, and her hair was tied back with a green ribbon that matched the door. "You think Grandma would be proud?" she asked. "She'd be beaming," I said. "Probably fussing over the table settings, too." Emma giggled. "That sounds about right." Tony came by and handed me a mason jar of lemonade. Sandra followed with a plate of cookies. Other volunteers floated in and out of the kitchen, prepping rooms, hanging curtains, carrying in donated books and lamps. The house was buzzing. Alive. Not the way it used to be, but in a new way. A good way. Later that evening, when the guests were gone and only the core crew remained, we gathered in the living room. Tony played soft jazz from her phone. Emma curled up with a book in Marjorie's old chair. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in my lap. The Buick keys were still in my pocket. Alex, the young mechanic I'd left the car to in the will, would be picking it up next week. I'd already told him to keep it running, keep it polished, and never, never, repaint it. "It's a promise," he said. "I'll treat her like gold." I'd driven it one last time the day before. Down the same winding backroads Marjorie and I used to take. Radio on. Windows down. Her favorite song, "The Way You Look Tonight," playing softly through the static. I pulled over at the old overlook where we once kissed in the summer of '83 and sat there for a while, the wind in my ears, the engine ticking softly. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty passenger seat. I wasn't talking to the car. Now, sitting back in the living room, I looked around at what had become of this house. My house. Our house. No longer a monument to loss. Now a vessel for hope. Real family sat here, not by blood, but by choice. Tony, quietly singing along to the music while folding laundry. Sandra, dozing with a half-eaten cookie still in hand. Emma, looking up at me now and then with a smile that said, "I'm still here." And me. Not alone. Not bitter. Just full, of memory, of purpose, of peace. Eventually, Emma walked over and sat beside me. "Do you miss her a lot?" she asked softly. "Every day. But does it still hurt?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "Not the way it used to. It's like, she's woven into everything now. The roses outside. The color on the door. The way this house sounds when people laugh. She's everywhere." Emma leaned her head against my shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't give up," she whispered. "Me too," I said. The clock chimed 8. Outside, the porch light flickered on, casting a soft glow across the yard. I stood up, walked to the front window, and looked out. The night was calm. The house was warm. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back with regret, but forward with quiet pride. Marjorie's house lived on, not as a memory, but as a promise. That even in the face of betrayal, something beautiful can still be rebuilt.